Wachie! Welcome to Shunyan, money money. Have you ever wondered what the deal is with the income tax exemption for status Indians? Why doesn't it apply to all Indigenous people in Canada? Well, I'm going to give you some background on it. This involves giving a short overview of two laws that were created in Canada, the Income Tax Act and the Indian Act. Both are very boring to read, but they have a huge impact on our lives. First of all, the Indian Act. It was created by the Government of Canada and it applies to people living in all provinces and territories. The Indian Act outlines the relationship between Canada and Indian people. As Indigenous people, we know that the Indian Act was created to control us and to assimilate us into Canadian colonial society. The Income Tax Act is the other act that I wanted to share with you briefly. It was also created by the federal government and applies to people in all provinces and territories, and it also applies to corporations. The Income Tax Act lays out the laws about the taxation of income for the Government of Canada. Who is responsible for paying tax, what is included in income, what can be deducted from your income, and how the tax is calculated. How do status Indians get the tax exemption? There is a clause in the Income Tax Act that gives an exemption from tax when laws allow it. That is the Indian Act. There is a section in the Indian Act, Section 87 if you're interested, that gives an exemption for the property of status Indians. And that exemption is from tax for the property of status Indians on reserve. And on reserve is really important. Property on reserve includes income that is earned or connected to an Indian reserve. Now, why doesn't it apply to Métis and Inuit people? The tax exemption doesn't apply to Métis and Inuit because the Indian Act doesn't apply to them. That's why only status Indians receive the income tax exemption. But that doesn't mean all status Indians are exempt from tax. Many of us earn income off reserve, so we are paying tax on that income. And many of us make purchases off reserve across Canada, and we pay tax on those purchases. So the fact that we don't pay tax is totally a myth that I'm here telling you is not true. Before I finish, I have some fun facts I want to share with you. Both the Indian Act and the income tax were set up to be temporary measures. The Indian Act was set up in 1867 by the federal government, who believed that they could assimilate us into society within a matter of years. Little did they know that more than 100 years later, we are still here. They had no clue how resilient we are. The Income Tax Act was set up in 1917 to pay for the costs of World War I. Once the war was over, the federal government realized they liked receiving this revenue and spending it on other items, and we still have it today. It's really interesting to see that these two very complicated laws are still in effect today, even though they were meant to be temporary laws. And one last thing occurred to me. The Indian Act was signed in 1867, and that's when the tax exemption was granted to status Indians on reserve. But the Income Tax Act came over 40 years later. At the time of the Indian Act in 1867, I bet the federal government did not anticipate that they would want to collect income tax from status Indians because they weren't even collecting it from settlers. I bet if they had realized how long we were going to survive, they would not have included that tax exemption in the Indian Act. What do you think? Miigwech. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your day.